Hey, how'd you like to find an ancient river of gold that had never been touched before? Now, ancient rivers and bench deposits and things like this are important sources of gold for individual prospectors, and yet they're not always really well understood. I'd like to take some time to really go into these things, to the geology of it, to how you can explore for it, so how you can find records of places where you can go look for these, where they were known in the past. Hey, I'm Chris Ralph, the professional prospector, and today we're going to be talking about ancient rivers of gold. And in fact, the best thing about a lot of these types of deposits is that they're still in their original place. They're actually undisturbed virgin gravels that you can go out and prospect for gold. And even in places where they were mined, a lot of times the old timers, what they would do is hydraulically mine these things. They would wash the gravel down the hill and run it through sluice boxes to get the gold. But they would wash this stuff, and the bedrock, the ground where they eventually reach the bedrock of the river as they wash the gravel away, the bedrock can have some really great gold in it too. There's a lot of times that they just didn't get all the gold that was there, and hunting either with a metal detector or by other means, I've done dry washing in these kinds of places too, those can really be productive and give you some great gold. So most of us really like these kinds of deposits, and if you haven't before, this is something you should really take advantage of if there are these types of things in your neighborhood. So it's well worthwhile to take a closer look at these kinds of deposits and how you can locate ancient rivers of gold. Let's take a look at some gold that comes out of these kinds of deposits.
Here's an example of the kind of gold that you would find in some of these ancient river and ancient bench deposits. If gold has been traveling in a river or stream, it's going to get rounded. And you can see that the pieces here have all been rounded somewhat. Some are more flattened than rounded, but still they show the signs of having traveled in a river. Here's another grouping of nuggets a little closer up. You can see that all of these nuggets have a sign that they've been traveling in a river. They're rolled, they're rounded, they're not sharp and angular like gold that's just newly out of a vein or into a river before it's traveled.
Now, the gravels I'm talking about can range from relatively recent age, like even only thousands of years old, to things that are very ancient and literally millions of years old in age. In California, where a lot of these things were mined and a huge amount of gold was produced from these ancient rivers, they tend to everybody calls them tertiary channels or tertiary rivers of gold. And that's not always correct, because not just every little bit of gravel that's no longer in a stream bed is a tertiary channel. In fact, it's a normal process that rivers, as they erode down, because rivers will cut down their bed through the mountains as they wear down the mountain range, will leave behind stranded bits of gravel above the river that gets to where it's as the river cuts down, you have beds of gravel where the river once flowed and this was part of the river, but now it's cut down and left this bit of gravel stranded behind high and dry. And those things have good gold in them because oftentimes they're not mined, or where they were, like I say, the bedrock can be very productive. So both of them, both the relatively recent stuff and the ancient stuff, can be really productive and produce really nice nuggets. But the gravels that are truly old enough to be called tertiary and maybe like millions of years old, or millions of years ago that it flowed as an actual stream, are often stranded many hundreds of feet high, even more than 1,000 feet high above the modern streams. Because they're so old, there's so much ancient erosion that's happened. Now these once were flowing rivers are now stranded almost on top of mountains. Now the benches that I talked about, where a river as it erodes down and leaves bits of gravel stranded behind, those things are often, it can be a few tens of feet to a few hundreds of feet above the modern stream. And they're often much smaller than the whole rivers that got, the really ancient ones were whole rivers that got stranded. And because of the way the ground was uplifting for mountains and that kind of stuff, you can often get situations where the ancient rivers flowed one way, but because of uplift, now the modern rivers flow a different way. And so where it's cut across, you can see these ancient rivers, but they go into the rock and into the mountain where they haven't been disturbed yet. Sometimes the miners, would find things like that, and where it was rich, they would drift mine in along the bedrock. They would find the channel of the ancient deposit, and they would mine in along the bedrock. Let's take a look at some pictures to kind of explain this in a better way.
Here is an excellent diagram to explain what I mean. You have basically a mountain with a river valley and the river flowing on either side of it, both to the right and to the left. And at the bottom of the valley, of course, is the present stream. And in our example, they're both going to be gold-bearing because this is gold-bearing country. But you can see on the left-hand side, there's an old bench that's up above the present river. The first one is not that much above it, but it's a ways, and it has gold-bearing gravel just like the modern stream does. And then above that one, there's a second older bench. It's higher up. You see, where the older bench was, the river used to be, but as it cut down to the level of the old bench. And as it continues to cut down and erode through the mountain, through the bedrock, you get the present river area. But way up on top of the mountain is the oldest channel of all. The oldest tertiary gravels end up on top of the mountain. Now, you can see the one on top of the mountain is multi-layered, and the top layer is a layer of hard basalt, and it resists weathering really good. And then the layer below that layer, it's numbered number 2. That layer is mostly sand and gravel, and light gravel and clay. And it has some gold in it, but not a lot. But the richest gravels are labeled number 3 that are in the bottom of this gravel bench on top, the gravel layer on top. Now, you got to remember, because this river once was at the bottom of a valley. And so imagine where the 2 present river valleys are. There was once a mountain over there, and the gravel on top was at the bottom of a valley. It's interesting to think, but we don't realize that over huge eons of time, mountains and mountain ranges are worn away by the effect of rainwater and gravity. And the very wearing and erosion is what makes the gravels that we mine for gold. Here's a close-up of the top tertiary type gravel channels that's on top of a mountain, and you can see the hash marked A on top is a capping of basaltic gravel that's capping of basalt lava that's very hard and resistant to weathering. And below B and C are the 2 layers of gold-bearing gravel. The layer B flowed over a layer of basalt. So the first layer of basalt was small, and B flowed over it, the upper yellow layer. And then C and D, at the lowermost yellow layer, is the original stream before the volcanoes started to erupt and bury the channel. This is an actual diagram from a mine in Tuolumne County in California. You can see the basalt on top that resists weathering. It's just a heavy, strong, tough lava. And then underneath it is the gravels that are gold-bearing. And then the lower is the slate, the country bedrock. And in between is the gold-bearing gravels marked both B and A. B is the upper part of the gold-bearing gravels, and it's mostly sand and clay and that sort of thing. And there is a little bit of gold in it, but not much. But the richest gold-bearing gravel is the part marked with an A at the bottom, and then the miners just put in a tunnel through the slate bedrock to reach the richest gravels, and were able to mine out the high-grade gold that was there at the bottom of the ancient channel.
Now, the tertiary rivers of California and the deep leads of Victoria, Australia have come to exist as preserved rivers that were rich in gold because of a certain set of geologic events that happened, a certain sequence of events that happened that basically buried these rivers and preserved them so that in our more modern times, long later, they are still there and still have the original gold nuggets that they had in them when they were formed 1,000,000 or more years ago. There are some other places that have similar geologic history. But like I say, the tertiary rivers of California and the deep leads of Victoria are perhaps two of the most famous. But there are other places as well, and we'll take a look at some of that. Let's take a look now at some more pictures of these things.
This is what you'd see for a bench just above a modern river. The high level of the river, this river is probably just about where the big boulders are at the foot of the gravel bench, but you can see all the rounded rocks and sand and gravel all distributed through the face of the hill up above the boulders. And this is where the river flowed once, but it's cut down and left this bench isolated above. And on the bedrock here, there's good gold. Now, this is the face of an old, true tertiary channel, old hydraulic mine area. And I remember that I said that the upper layers of these old ancient channels are mostly clay and sand, and it has a little bit of gold in it, though not much. You can't see the bedrock at the bottom of the cliff because the cliff has just eroded down and the material has come off of it and buried the bedrock in front of it. But these faces of these old cliffs can be very tall, and this tertiary channel is actually more than 1,000 feet above the modern stream below it. And here is an area of exposed bedrock where the slumping gravels haven't buried it over. And you can see it looks just like gravels and bedrock you might find alongside a modern stream. But this is way up on top of the mountain and is, like I say, more than 1,000 feet higher than the modern stream. Now, this bedrock, even though it's been cleaned off by the miners, has great potential. They did a good job of catching the gold. They caught the gold as much as they wanted, but they weren't perfect. And a lot of times a metal detector can do a great job of finding nuggets in cracks and crevices and other hidden places that the old-time miners missed.
The old timers found these things because where the modern streams cut through the ancient rivers or even cut through the gravel beds of the benches, there was bleed off into the modern streams. And the old-time miners found, there's nuggets here, and they were able to trace it up the side of the hill, up the side of the mountains, and see these deposits. Sometimes they were directly visible. Some benches you can literally look at from below and see, oh yeah, there's a big bed of gravel up the side of that hill. And the boulders and the cobbles and everything is all rounded. In fact, it looks exactly like a modern stream bed, but it's nowhere near the modern stream. The modern stream is down here, and this unworked bench of gravel is way up there. And so the miners were able to figure out that, hey, there's gold in the stream down here. Probably gold up in the gravel's up there. And of course they went and tested it and found out they were right. When the old timers found these beds, especially the ones that were the ancient rivers, they often were able to trace them. They find a bit here, they look over on the hill over there, there's another bit over there, they look on the hill further in, and there's another bit over there. And so they're able to trace the flow of the ancient river as it went. And that's a hint for us as prospectors that we can be able to look and see that same kind of things. But some places it was just isolated patches, and it was hard to tell. There's an isolated patch of gravel here, but there's not anything else nearby. And so it's hard to say, well, where did that river come from? There's just an isolated patch of gravel. But the old-time operators and geologists and that sort of thing put together maps of where they thought the rivers flowed, and they can be useful to prospectors like us in searching for these things. So let's take a look at some of these old-time maps and maps compiled and drawn out of these things that can help us find these ancient channels.
Now here's a map of the Sierra Nevada Gold Country, and because the Sierra Nevada Gold Country is practically in my backyard, you're going to see that most of my maps are areas to cover this because that's where I'm going to be researching. But I've seen other maps for other areas that cover similar sorts of things, including maps for Victoria in Australia and other countries and other states. So it's not unique, but this is the example that I have for you to look at. Now, depending on what device you're looking at this on, it might be awfully hard to read, but it shows all the lines of the various tertiary rivers that flowed through the gold country millions of years ago. And in places, these rivers are preserved and still have lots of gold in them, and were mined too by the old-time miners in the 1800s. Now, not every place along these river lines is still there. Some of it's been eroded away into the modern streams, but it shows where they flowed, and if you get a geologic map, it'll show the patches that remain. So let's take a look at a geologic map that actually shows where the patches that still remain are to be found. Now, here's an actual geologic map where they've marked on the map where these tertiary gravels are located, where they still outcrop, where there were old workings and that sort of thing. And it's 100 times more complicated than the map I just showed you that had simple lines going across and indicating where the channels are thought to have flowed. When you look at a real map, it's bits and pieces of the channel that are left, and it's really hard to see. And in fact, because of the color scheme on this map, it's doubly hard to see. So let me take a look. Let me show you a map where I colored the tertiary gravels green so you can see it better. So here, where you can see where the actual old hydraulic mines and where the channel outcrops are marked in green, so they stand out a lot better, it looks so complex. And it's easy to just draw a line and say, oh, well, the channel flowed from here to there. But there were sub-channels and the little pieces and things that linked together and, different stream channels that flowed in different directions. And it becomes so much more complex when you look at the reality of the situation on the ground.
Now, in some of the higher elevations of the Sierra Nevada Gold Country and elsewhere, Montana and certainly Alaska and a lot of other places, there are things that are basically ancient glacial gravels. And as glaciers, people ask me about, well, do glaciers, do they make placer deposits? Well, directly, no. Actually, glaciers are placer deposit destroyers. They wreck placer deposits. Placer deposits occur because of the flow of a stream. It works like a sluice box, and you wash away the lighter material and leave the heavier material tending to be on bedrock or in crevices in the bedrock, that sort of thing. It works like a sluice box, right? Wash away the lighter material. But glaciers come through and they just bulldoze everything and stir it all up. And so that concentration along the bedrock, it just gets ripped up and pushed down the hill. And so, glaciers themselves tend to be destroyers of placer deposits. They rip up the sides of mountains, they rip up valleys, and deposits of placer gold that were rich before just get all mixed up into all the other gravels, and now there's hardly any gold. The amount of gold in the gravel is really low. So what happens though with these glacial gravels, and we see this in the Midwest too, you see this is a very common thing, where as later flow and erosion happens, not glacial, but it washes over the glacier gravels. And this happens in California. Like I say, there's a number of places in Alaska that have this, but elsewhere too. You wash over those glacier gravels and you form new streams and new rivers and that kind of stuff. They cut through the beds of low-grade glacial gravel and they reconcentrate the gold. And so there are a number of places, and I've found some really nice nuggets in places in California where you have reconcentration of glacial gravels. And like I say, a lot of the Alaska gold is reconcentration of glacial gravels. Let's take a look at some pictures related to that.
Moraine-type gravels are the result of glaciers moving material around. And normally you will see them, in California anyway, up in the higher elevations. In Alaska, of course, they can be almost anywhere. And you'll see that the rocks that are in these piles are angular. They're not well rounded. They're maybe a little rounded, but they're mostly more angular type of rock that hasn't been rolled around in a river for a long time. This gravel you can see is well-rounded. This is from an ancient river that had lots of gold in it and was mined in the early days. You can see the river gravel is well-rounded because it flowed in a normal river. And that's why the ancient rivers of gold have rounded cobbles and boulders just like this flowing modern stream.
Now, in some parts of California and other places as well, there are ancient lake beds that tend to be rich in gold. And the lakes, it's not so much, you think of a lake as a river comes in, just dumps more gravel, it dumps more gravel, it dumps more gravel, and you get this big, bed of mixed gravel that was dumped at various times. But sometimes lakes pull back and recede, and they, they're full, and then later the river has to run further to get to it. And so there is some washing that can occur in lake bed types of deposits. And I've found some nice gold in lake bed types of deposits. They're less common than the glacial ones in California, but in other places they can be very, very productive. So it's important to remember lake bed deposits. In Nevada, there are several places where lake bed deposits are important sources of gold, and actually few people really recognize this geology. It's something that's not very well known. But in a lot of places in Pershing and Humboldt County, what's sometimes called the greater Rye Patch area, and it's not just Rye Patch, but it's all the other districts that go around it and extend into Humboldt and Pershing County in quite a ways. A lot of these things were ancient lake bed types of deposits, and they've been eroded through and reconcentrated and or partially washed away. And these are lake bed deposits in the desert, which you don't normally think of, but in various times, just because the geology of our time or the weather of our time is one thing, it doesn't mean that the weather has always been the same forever and ever. People talk about global warming, but you know what? Global weather and climate change has been going on for millions of years, long before anybody burned any fossil fuels. Now, ancient rivers of great age, like I say, are common in California, in the Mother Lode country, especially toward the northern part of the Mother Lode country, but also in places in Victoria, in Australia, and certain places in Alaska. In the 40-mile district, there are gravel beds that are way up high on the mountaintops, and it's thought that a lot of the gold from these ancient rivers that were way up high have washed down into the modern streams of the 40-mile district. There are some gravels like this in the Yukon district in Canada. The white channel gravels are basically of this type. So where does one look to find these ancient rivers of gold and even the ancient benches, river benches? And to be honest, the river benches along the streams are probably a lot more common and occur in many areas. And in fact, most gold districts with erosion and stream flow that have a topography that's hills and mountains and that kind of thing have deposits of benches of comparatively recent, maybe thousands of years ago. It was in the stream bed, but now it's stranded high and dry. These are probably easier to spot. And what you're looking for with these is, one, signs of old workings, like the old-time miners, they found them and they worked them, but they may have left parts of it unworked, or they may have bedrock that's worth prospecting, or just deposits of gravel that you can see up above the normal flow of the stream bed. And it's important to keep your eyes open and to look for these things. They can occur not just in green forested river areas with lots of water, but in deserts too. I've found them in gold-bearing desert areas. So it's important to keep your eyes open for benches. Let's take a look at some pictures.
When you're hunting for unworked river benches, this is exactly what you're looking for. You can see the gravel sitting on top. You can see the bedrock at the bottom. And you can see, some people have done a little bit of digging, and you don't want to dig in and get underneath a big overhang. But there's going to be gold concentrated on the bedrock, and you can see all the rounded river gravels. This was once part of a flowing stream, but now it's been isolated up above the stream, and it's a great place to dig and find gold. Here's another example of the kind of thing to be looking for. Now, this doesn't have a big pile of gravel on top of the bedrock, but you can see all the loose, rounded boulders. This is a bench that was worked by the old timers. They washed most of the gravel off, but I can guarantee you there'll be some gravel spots that they missed, and there'll maybe be some crevices that have nuggets in them. This is going to be another great place to look, another bench up above a modern gold-bearing stream. And benches don't have to be big either. Now, it's hard to tell from this angle, but the stream in the background behind my dry washer is about 5-6 feet lower than the bench that I'm standing on. I'm standing on the bedrock. And I went in here and got some nice nuggets with my metal detector, and then came through and dry washed the rest of the loose gravel and got a lot of nice gold. This is a very small stream. It's just a little bench above it, 5-6 feet above the modern stream, and still a great place to find some gold. And I want to show you something that's from a desert environment. And again, a small bench, but this is a gold-bearing drainage, a gold-bearing canyon, and you can see the gray bedrock, and look, on top of the bedrock are rounded rocks and gravel. And since this is a stream with a number of rich gold mines up above, you know there's going to be good gold here. And so even in small places like this, your metal detector, your dry washer, can really find some good gold.
But as far as the ancient gravels, research can be a really good tool. I would not go out just in some random area that has never had any history of ancient rivers of gold. I would focus on areas where it's been known in the past that some of this stuff has been found. And different kinds of research can really be of great benefit to the prospector. And determining the difference between gold that comes from an ancient riverbed source versus gold that comes off of a hard rock vein that's eroding into the same stream, it can be tell the difference of it. And because generally speaking, of course, your river-rounded gravels, your river-rounded gold will be rounded and smooth, at least in a good way. It may not be perfectly blob-shaped and, completely rounded, but it will show definite signs of river rounding. Whereas stuff eroding right off the side of a hill, off of a rich gold vein or a pocket, is going to be angular and sharp. Now, I did a video recently on how to tell the difference between gold that's coming from a distance and gold that's coming from right close by, and how to take advantage of those ideas and find more gold for yourself. And I'm going to put a link to that video right up top here, and you can click on it if you want some more information along that line. Now, finding gold is a skill, and learning to recognize rounded bed gravel deposits or not so rounded glacial gravels and that sort of thing is a skill and a knowledge set that takes some effort. You gotta learn. It's not something where you're just gonna walk out in the middle of a forest and trip over a 2-pound nugget. That might have happened 150, 200 years ago, but it's not so likely today. So to get you up to speed and to give you the skills of a prospector so that you can go out and find gold for yourself, I wrote a book, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my book right now.
So this is my book, Fistful of Gold. You can see it's an encyclopedia distilling down my 45 plus years of prospecting experience plus my degree into the parts that you need to know. I spent most of 10 years writing this. It was not just a simple effort that, I sat down and wrote it. You can see it's like 250,000 words. It's not something you're going to read through in a day or maybe even a week or more. But it's got a lot of information and reference material that you can come back to. You can read it once and read it again and get more out of it because there's just that much depth of material in this. I wrote this book because I want you to have the skills to go out and find fistfuls of gold for yourself. And if you have the skills and know what you're doing and get out in the field and make a real effort, you can find significant gold. It's not easy. I'm not going to tell you that because, gold, it wouldn't be, close to $2,000 an ounce, which is what it is right now. It wouldn't be so expensive if it was easy to find. It's not easy. You just can't walk out into an old gold field and start picking up nuggets. If the gold was easy to see and find, the old timers would have picked it up and taken it themselves. So you got to have skill. You got to know what you're doing. You got to be able to master what it takes to find gold, and you've got to have the persistence and put in the effort to find the material, to find the gold or diamonds or gemstones that you're looking for. Now, book has geology, it has facts about gold, it has stuff about diamonds and platinum, but it's mostly about gold deposits, how gold deposits form, how placer and nuggets form, all the questions you've probably wanted to ask. The book is available on Amazon, and I'll put a link to it in the description below, but you can look up on Amazon Fistful of Gold and by Chris Ralph and find this book. Now, the book, if you look on it, it has a very high rating. It has like a 4.7 or 4.8 out of 5, which is really high. I mean, it's hard to please everybody, but I'm close to a 5 out of 5, not far from it, right? So it's been out. I've sold more than 15,000 copies of this book, and I've had tremendous response, tremendous positive response by the people who buy it. And I think if you buy it, you'll be just as happy with it. Now, in addition to my book, I also have a website that I do, and I'll tell you a little bit more about my website and show you some images from the website right now.
Now, my website is nevadaoutbackgems.com, and I'll put a link to the prospecting page, this prospecting encyclopedia page, down in the description below, but you can find it at Nevada Outback Gems. I sell some jewelry, turquoise, other gemstones there. I don't always keep the inventory perfectly up to date, so if you're interested in anything you see, do contact me first before trying to send me money or anything, because I want you to be able to get what you order. But the website has lots of different stories, old adventures, even some stories, true stories from the old-time miners of the 1800s. So I think it's something you'll find interesting.
The other thing I want to go back to is that all my comments, I want you guys to ask questions on the comments for my videos. I answer 100% of the comments that are made on my videos. Now, sometimes if somebody just says, hey, great video, I really enjoyed it, the comment may just be, well, I'm really glad you liked it. Or if it's a simple question. And sometimes I get people who ask me questions, it would take a book to answer that question. And I recommend that they just buy the book. But I answer all my questions. I try to help people as much as I can. I'm here to help you. So if you're interested in gaining the skills, if you're interested in knowing what you need to know to be successful, follow along with me. Subscribe to my channel, hit the bell so that they'll let you know when I come out with new videos, and I try to do that pretty much every Saturday morning. And you'll enjoy with me, you'll come along with me, we'll have an adventure together, and we will find some nice gold and see what it's really like getting out in the woods, or the deserts, or the mountains, wherever we land, wherever the gold is, wherever the diamonds are, wherever the platinum is. Come along, we'll have some fun. And I'll see you real soon on the next video.